Hello everybody, my name is Mr. Dumpkins, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most powerful cards in Hearthstone, Leeroy Jenkins. So, just taking a look at his stats, we can see that he's 4 mana, 6 power, 2 toughness, and he has charge and battlecry. Summon 2/1/1 whelps for your opponent. Now the whelps on an empty board will be able to kill Leeroy as soon as you summon him, so you definitely don't want to cast him very early because he is better the later the game goes, because the later the game goes, the less relevant those whelps become. Uh, Most people mitigate the effect of those whelps by either killing them. Let's say you have some other creatures when you cast him, but 2 power or 2 toughness still means that he's going to die relatively easy. So the best way to play Leeroy is to cast him at the end of the game when he's doing the last points of damage or almost doing the last points of damage, because that way you make the whelps irrelevant by just ignoring them. Your opponent, it doesn't matter that the opponent has the whelps because they're just dead anyway. That's what really makes Leeroy good. He doesn't go in every deck because of these whelps. You have to be able to mitigate the effect of those, and let's say in a control deck you're not going to be able to stop the 1/1 whelps without using more cards, and Leeroy is pretty easy to deal with regardless of the whelps because of the 2 toughness, so he's not very resilient. So control decks don't want to play a non-resilient 4-drop if they can't abuse him. But in aggressive decks you'll see him a lot. And you definitely want to craft him. He should be one of the first legendaries you craft in the game, because the aggressive decks that he is played in, he's normally the only legendary in those decks. So it's cheap with dust, and you can get a tier 1 competitive deck that you can use to analyze all of the other decks that you'll be facing while you're still building up your collection to start getting some of the other legendaries. So let's take a look at some of the decks that you'll see him in. Now, we have the standard aggressive decks like Hunter and Paladin, where you can see that he is located at the tail end of these decks because he is one of the most expensive cards, and you definitely want to play him last because of that. Hunter is more of a mid-range deck, so it's not... It's pushing Leeroy in the sense that you might not need him, but it's a mid-range deck, but it has a combo with Unleash the Hounds and Starving Buzzard that, deals a lot of damage at once, and Leeroy is a lot of damage at once, so he still fits with the theme of the combo, which is why you want to play him in this deck. Another deck that Leeroy sees play in is the Miracle Rogue deck. He's not what makes the deck tick, because that is the Gadgeton Auctioneer, but he is the card that makes this deck able to win, because he has absurd amount of damage. With just 1 Shadow Step and a Cold Blood, that's 16 damage out of nowhere for 7 mana. That is very impressive, and with another Shadow Step on top of that, you're looking at 22 damage, meaning that this Miracle deck can just do incidental damage as it needs to, while focusing more on the board if it has to, and then it can always rely on drawing a lot of its cards and always having the Leeroy combo to finish them off with. Handlock is another deck that you can see Leeroy in because of Shadow Flame. Combined with him, you'll kill the tokens as well as most of the other 6 toughness creatures on their board. But he can also be comboed with Power Overwhelming. For 5 mana, you can deal 10 damage. Or if you also have 10 mana, you can add Faceless Manipulator after that to add another 10 damage to the board, meaning it's 20 total. And that is a lot of damage that Leeroy can do. You can see why he could be more... He is not generally more powerful than a Fireball, because Fireball is, just the damage out of nowhere, regardless of taunt. But being a creature means that you can abuse him with a lot of power pumping effects and Faceless Manipulator. So he's almost more... He has a higher ceiling than Fireball, but he probably has a less average game. Some decks that you don't want to look at Leeroy in would be something like Druid decks, because they're more mid-range. They want to control the board with spells, big creatures, and Leeroy's 2 toughness just doesn't really lend to the resiliency that a lot of these cards want to have. And then a deck that I see Leeroy played in a lot, which I don't think he should be played at all in, is Zoo. Now, most of the times, Zoo decks are their goal is to control the board, and then with any creatures that aren't controlling the board can just attack the opponent because there's nothing else to attack. So what that means is that you're at the beginning of the game, you're going to be using all of your creatures to destroy your opponent's board while drawing cards with your hero power so that you'll always have more cards than them. And then at the end of the game is when you start chipping away at their life to kill them. Leeroy really only wants to attack life. If he's trading with another creature, you're still giving your opponent 2/1/1 whelps, and that is not something that you want to be looking at with a Zoo deck. You might have been killed by him a few times against Zoo decks, but believe me, the other 9 times the opponent probably discarded him to Doomguard or Soulfire, or just couldn't cast him because the 2 whelps would have done something far more detrimental than the 6 damage that Leeroy would have given. So that is Leeroy Jenkins. When you're building decks with him, you definitely want to look for synergies that you have. You know, take a look at Handlock and Miracle Rogue. You can see the synergies that you can do with him. Even Hunter has synergy with Unleash the Hounds. Leeroy Jenkins into Unleash the Hounds means that you get 2 more 1/1s. And the Unleash the Hounds can even trade with the 1/1s, meaning that, you know, you can mitigate that drawback if you have to play Leeroy earlier than you wanted to. And if don't have any synergies with him, just make sure that you're attacking the opponent to death as fast as possible. And that way Leeroy will be at his home. If you just have a mid-range deck and you're just looking for some powerful creatures, I would recommend just playing maybe a Chillwind Yeti or something like that. Because Leeroy has more power, but he's not as resilient, and he's more of a one-turn pony than anything consistent or something that you want to be trading with, which with more mid-range and control decks you definitely want to be doing. Alright guys, I hope you learned something about Leeroy Jenkins today, and I will see you next time.